Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Easy English Spark channel. I'm so excited to have you here today, especially if you're ready to take your English skills to the next level. Today's episode is all about the incredible journey of learning, growth, and overcoming challenges. Just like I did when I moved to New York. From facing language barriers to finding new career opportunities, we'll dive into how you can build your confidence, speak English more fluently, and tackle any obstacles that come your way. Let's get started and light up your English journey with some powerful lessons I've learned along the way. Chapter 1. Beginning the Journey. It was a crisp autumn morning when I, Selena, stood at the airport, ready to begin the most exciting and daunting journey of my life. I had always dreamed of coming to New York, the city that never sleeps, to improve my English and experience a world far different from my quiet, small hometown. As I stood there, I could feel the weight of my decision. My family was proud, of course, but I could see the sadness in their eyes. I was leaving everything I knew behind. My family, my friends, and the place I called home. My mother had packed my suitcase with love and care, tucking in small notes of encouragement between my clothes. My father, always the strong one, gave me a firm hug, reminding me to stay strong and to hold my head high. They wanted me to succeed, but I could tell they would miss me. I had dreamed of this moment for years. Back home, I had always known that learning English was the key to unlocking new opportunities. I had studied tirelessly, reading books, practicing, conversations with friends and teachers. But now, in this moment, I couldn't help but wonder. Was I really ready for what lay ahead? What if I didn't fit in? What if my English wasn't good enough? What if I couldn't make friends in such a big city? These thoughts ran through my mind as I walked through the airport, my heart racing with excitement and nervousness all at once. The airport was buzzing with activity. People rushing to their gates, the hum of announcements overhead, and the endless sea of faces. It felt like the whole world was here, all coming together in this single place. And soon I would be a part of it. I was about to step into a world I had only seen in movies. The streets, the buildings, the lights, all of it was so different, and yet so familiar in my mind. I had imagined this moment for so long, but now that it was real, it felt overwhelming. As I boarded the plane, the reality of it all started to sink in. The flight was long, and I spent most of the time gazing out the window, lost in thought. I thought about my family, the life I was leaving behind, and the life that awaited me in New York. A mixture of emotions swirled inside me: excitement, fear, and anticipation. I knew I was doing the right thing, but it didn't stop the fear from creeping in. When the plane finally landed, I could hardly believe it. I was here. I had arrived in New York, the city I had always dreamed of. The airport was massive, filled with travelers from all over the world, each with their own stories and reasons for being here. I couldn't help but smile as I made my way through the terminal. This was the beginning of my new life. I stepped out of the airport and took a deep breath. The air smelled different, fresher, alive with energy. The streets were crowded with people hurrying along, yellow cabs honking as they zoomed past, and the towering skyscrapers seemed to touch the sky. It was so different from the quiet, peaceful life I had known. And yet, it felt exciting. I felt small in this vast city, but at the same time, a spark of hope lit up inside me. This was it. This was the adventure I had been waiting for. Over. The next few days, everything was a blur. I settled into my small apartment in Manhattan, a cozy little place with a view of the bustling streets below. New York never slept. The noise, the people, the fast pace of life. It was all so much to take in. Everywhere I looked, there was something new to see. A food cart on the corner, a street performer playing music, a billboard flashing with bright lights. I felt like I was in the middle of a movie, and I was finally the main character. But despite the excitement, I couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The one thing that kept nagging at me was my English. I had spent so many years studying the language, but now, in this new city, it felt like I wasn't prepared at all. The words came fast, and the slang was unfamiliar. Sometimes I found myself nodding along, pretending I understood, but inside, I was struggling. People spoke so quickly, and I felt like I was always a step behind. But I told myself not to worry. This was the reason I came here, to improve my English, to push through the discomfort, and to learn. As I ventured out into the city, I made a promise to myself. I would not be afraid. I would take every opportunity to practice my English, to speak with the locals, and to embrace the challenges that came with this new chapter of my life. I had come here for a reason, to learn, to grow, and to explore a world I had only dreamed about. With that thought in mind, I walked confidently into my new life. New York was waiting for me, and I was ready to face whatever came my way. This was just the beginning, and I was determined to make the most of it. The road ahead might be long, but it was mine to travel, and I was ready. Chapter 2: Arrival in New York. I had arrived. The moment I stepped out of the airport, I felt an overwhelming rush of emotions. The hustle and bustle of New York surrounded me. The sounds, the lights, the people. It was all so much to take in, and I had only just begun. As I walked through the busy terminal, I couldn't help but look around in awe. The airport was like a small city of its own, with people hurrying in every direction, some in suits, some in casual clothes, some dragging large suitcases behind them. The diversity of faces and accents reminded me just how far away I was from home. But at the same time, I felt like I was stepping into a world of endless possibilities, the world I had always imagined. I picked up my luggage, my hands trembling slightly as I pulled the handle. It felt like I was in a dream, and every step I took brought me closer to the life I had imagined for so long. The bright lights of the Aichi airport signaled the start of this new chapter, and I could feel my heart racing in anticipation. As I exited the airport, I was greeted by the cool, crisp air of New York City. It smelled different, fresher, sharper, like it was alive with energy. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb every detail. The buildings that stretched toward the sky, the traffic that never stopped, and the constant movement of people on the sidewalks. I had seen it all in movies, but being here in person felt entirely different. The first thing that hit me was the noise. It was loud, chaotic, but strangely exciting. The honking of car horns, the rumble of buses, the sound of footsteps rushing past. Everywhere I turned, there was something happening. People walked with purpose, moving quickly, but there was a rhythm to it. A sort of dance that only people who had lived in this city could understand. I had read so much about New York before coming here. I had heard stories of how the city never sleeps, how it's always moving, always changing. But now that I was here, it was hard to believe. I had never been in a place that felt so alive. I looked up at the towering skyscrapers, their glass windows reflecting the sun. The streets seemed to go on forever, and the city stretched out in every direction. It was overwhelming, but it was also incredibly beautiful. I took a taxi to my new apartment, which I had rented online before leaving home. The ride was an adventure in itself. The taxi zoomed through the streets, weaving in and out of traffic, with a skill I could never master. The driver barely looked up as he navigated the busy roads, honking his horn at anyone who got in his way. I couldn't help but be fascinated by the way people moved through the city. It was a constant flow, like a river that never stopped. As we drove, I looked out the window at the different neighborhoods. I passed through Times Square, the giant billboards flashing bright lights, advertisements for everything from Broadway, shows to the latest tech gadgets. The energy was palpable, and I couldn't help but feel a little like a small fish in an enormous ocean. But I also felt a sense of excitement building inside me. This was the place where dreams were made. This was where I was going to make my own mark. When I finally arrived at my apartment, I could hardly believe it. It was smaller than I had imagined, but it was cozy. The building was old, but well maintained, and the windows overlooked a busy street. It was the perfect place to start my new life. I unpacked my suitcase, putting away my clothes and setting up my small space. I put a few pictures of my family on the table, trying to make it feel like home. It was strange, being in a new place, so far from everything I had ever known. But at the same time, it was thrilling. I was on my own now, and I had the chance to build something for myself. The next few days were a blur of settling in. I explored the neighborhood, learning the streets, finding a small grocery store where I could buy the essentials. I was a little overwhelmed by the pace of life, but there was also something comforting about it. New York had a way of making you feel both anonymous and connected at the same time. I would pass people on the street, and though I didn't know them, there was an unspoken bond. We were all part of this giant moving machine, each playing our small part. Despite the excitement, there was also a part of me that felt lonely. I missed my family, my friends, the familiarity of my hometown. I hadn't met anyone yet, and the language barrier was more difficult than I had anticipated. Sometimes I would find myself lost in conversations, struggling to understand the fast-paced English of the locals. I wanted so badly to speak like them, to fit in, but it wasn't easy. I would often second-guess myself, wondering if they understood me or if they thought I was strange. But I knew this was part of the journey. I had come to New York to learn, to grow, and to experience life in a way I never could have back home. The challenges were part of the process. The more I explored, the more I realized how much I had to learn. One evening, as I walked through Central Park, I stopped to watch the sunset. The park was peaceful, with families and couples walking along the paths, the sounds of the city fading away in the distance. I took a deep breath, letting the calmness of the moment settle over me. I had made it to New York, and this was just the beginning. There was so much ahead of me, so many things I wanted to learn, and so many people I wanted to meet. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I made a promise to myself. No matter how difficult it got, no matter how lonely I felt, I would keep going. New York had welcomed me with open arms, and I was going to take full advantage of every opportunity it had to offer. This was my new life, and I was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 3. Language Challenge. When I first arrived in New York, one thing was clear to me. The language barrier was real. I had studied English for years back home, through textbooks, online courses, and with my friends. I thought I was ready. I thought I had prepared myself for the language challenges ahead. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality of being in a city where people spoke so quickly, with so many different accents, and used slang that I had never encountered in any of my lessons. At first, I felt confident. After all, I could hold a conversation, understand most of what I read, and even express myself fairly well. But then, I stepped into the real world. The moment I entered my new English class, I realized just how much more there was to learn. It wasn't just about vocabulary and grammar. It was about understanding the rhythm, the speed, and the nuances of the language. The first day of class was overwhelming. I was surrounded by people from all over the world: Brazil, Japan, Mexico, and Russia. We were all there for the same reason: to improve our English. The teacher, Ms. Clark, was a native New Yorker, and she spoke so fast that at times I felt like I was in a whirlwind of words. She would say things like gonna, wanna, and gimme, and I had no idea what they meant. I had never encountered these informal expressions in any of my lessons back home. I tried to follow along, but the speed at which she spoke left me scrambling to catch up. I remember the first time she asked the class a question: "What's your favorite thing about New York?" The question was simple enough, but when it was my turn to speak, I froze. I had prepared an answer in my head in my native language, but when I tried to say it in English, the words didn't come out the way I wanted. I stumbled over the sentence, trying to find the right words, and all I could think about was how everyone was waiting for me to speak. I could feel my face turning red with embarrassment. After class, I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. It was like everything I had learned had evaporated the moment I walked into the classroom. I questioned myself. Why had I come here? Was I even good enough to be in this class? Would I ever get to the level I wanted to be? The next day, I made a decision. I would not let the language barrier hold me back. I would face this challenge head on, no matter how difficult it felt. I knew that I wasn't going to become fluent overnight, but if I kept pushing myself, kept practicing, and kept learning from my mistakes, I would improve. I started to pay closer attention to the way people spoke around me. I would walk through the streets of New York, eavesdropping on conversations and trying to pick up new words or phrases. It wasn't always easy, but slowly, I started to understand more of what people were saying. At first, it was just the basics, the simple greetings like, "How's it going?" or "What's up?" But as time went on, I began to catch the slang, the casual expressions, and even the idioms that New Yorkers used every day. One afternoon, I went to a local coffee shop near my apartment. I had seen a sign that said, "Free English Practice," and something inside me told me to give it a try. I walked in, feeling a little nervous, but the friendly barista welcomed me with a warm smile. She was a native New Yorker, and as I ordered my coffee, I noticed how quickly she spoke. But instead of feeling intimidated, I decided to challenge myself. I focused intently on her words, listening carefully to the way she spoke. "What's up?" she asked with a smile. "You come here often?" I smiled back, trying to remember the correct response. "Not really," I said, "but I'm trying to practice my English." She nodded and gave me some tips on how to improve. We started talking more, and soon I realized that I was understanding her better. I wasn't just hearing the words, I was starting to get the meaning behind them, the tone, the context. That small conversation gave me more confidence. I realized that practicing English didn't always have to happen in a formal classroom. It could happen in everyday situations, in the coffee shop, on the street, or even at the grocery store. Every time I spoke, I learned something new. I learned how to use the right words, how to ask questions, and how to express myself without worrying too much about making mistakes. As the weeks went by, I noticed my English improving. I started to feel more comfortable speaking with people. I could understand more of the conversations around me. The fear that I had felt before, fear of making mistakes, fear of not being understood, began to fade. I was becoming more confident in my abilities. But the challenges didn't stop. There were still moments when I didn't understand something someone said, or when I struggled to express myself clearly. I would sometimes feel frustrated, but I reminded myself that this was part of the process. Learning a language wasn't easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. It took time, patience, and a lot of practice. But every step forward was a step toward fluency. One day, I was at the library, reading a book in English. It wasn't a textbook or a simple beginner's book. It was a novel, something I had picked up on a whim, thinking I might be able to understand it. As I flipped through the pages, I came across a sentence I didn't quite understand. I paused and read it again. This time, the meaning clicked. I realized that I had just understood a complex sentence without having to translate it into my native language. That moment was a breakthrough for me. I had crossed a line I hadn't even realized I was approaching. I was thinking in English. That's when I knew I was on the right path. The language challenge wasn't over. It never would be. But I had taken the first steps toward mastering it. I had learned to embrace the process, to accept the mistakes, and to celebrate the small victories along the way. From that moment forward, I made a promise to myself. I would continue to challenge myself, to listen more, to speak more, and to never be afraid to make mistakes. Because with each mistake, I was one step closer to becoming the fluent English speaker I had always dreamed of being. Chapter 4: Exploring the City. The first few weeks in New York had been a whirlwind of adjustment, trying to settle into my new life. Between the language challenges, finding my way around the city and trying to get used to the fast pace of everything. It felt like there was little time to just breathe. But then, one Saturday morning, I decided to take a step back, put the books down, and really explore the city I had come to call home. I had seen so much about New York before I arrived, through movies, books, and stories from friends who had visited. The iconic landmarks, the busy streets, the culture, all of it had been ingrained in my mind. But now that I was here, I wanted to experience it firsthand. No more just seeing pictures and hearing about it. I was going to walk through these streets, see the sights, and really feel the heartbeat of the city. I woke up early that Saturday, eager to get started. The sky was clear, and the sun was shining brightly through the window of my apartment. I grabbed my jacket, put on my comfortable shoes, and headed out the door. My first stop was Central Park. I had heard so much about it from locals and tourists alike, and I was excited to finally see it for myself. When I arrived at the park, I was immediately struck by how vast it was. It felt like a peaceful oasis in the middle of the chaotic city. As I walked through the gates, the noise from the streets seemed to fade away, replaced by the sound of birds chirping and the rustling of leaves. There were joggers running past me, people walking their dogs, and families enjoying picnics on the grass. I found a bench near a small pond and sat down for a moment to take it all in. I closed my eyes and let the calmness of the park wash over me. For the first time since I arrived in New York, I felt a sense of peace. The city was so alive, so vibrant. But in this moment, in this place, I could breathe. I watched as children played, their laughter echoing through the air, and couples strolled hand in hand, enjoying the warmth of the sun. It was as if Central Park was a world of its own, separate from the busy streets of New York. After a while, I decided to leave the park and head to my next destination, Times Square. As I walked toward the area, the city's energy began to change. The streets became more crowded, the buildings taller, and the lights brighter. When I finally stepped into Times Square, it was nothing like I had imagined. It was even more spectacular. The giant billboards and neon lights seemed to pulse with energy, advertising everything from Broadway shows to the latest tech gadgets. There were so many people, all moving in different directions, yet it felt like there was an unspoken rhythm to it. Everyone had a place to be, but no one was in a rush to get there. The vibrant colors, the flashing lights, the street performers, all of it made Times Square feel alive. It was like a stage, and the people were the actors in a never-ending performance. I walked around, taking in the sights, the sounds, and the smells. Street vendors were selling hot dogs, pretzels, and ice cream, while others were handing out flyers for the latest Broadway shows. I couldn't resist stopping at one of the food carts and grabbing a pretzel, just like so many others were doing. As I bit into the warm, salty snack, I felt a sense of belonging. In that moment, I was part of the New York experience. I was no longer just an outsider looking in. I was a part of the pulse of the city. From Times Square, I decided to explore a little further. I made my way toward the Empire State Building, another iconic landmark I had always dreamed of seeing. When I finally reached the base of the building, I looked up in awe. It was even more impressive in person. The sheer size of the skyscraper made me feel small, but in a good way. It reminded me that I was just one person in this giant, sprawling city, a city full of stories, experiences, and dreams. As I stood there, gazing up at the Empire State Building, I reflected on how far I had come since I first arrived in New York. Just a few weeks ago, everything had seemed overwhelming. The language, the people, the noise. It had all been so much to process. But now, as I stood in the middle of one of the world's most famous cities, I felt a sense of pride. I was learning, I was growing, and I was starting to feel at home. After visiting the Empire State Building, I decided to head to the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, another place I had read about and wanted to see. I walked through the streets, passing by small cafes, quirky shops, and art galleries. New York was a city full of surprises, and every corner seemed to have something new waiting to be discovered. At MoMA, I marveled at the artwork, from famous paintings by Van Gogh and Picasso to contemporary pieces that made me think about the world in a new way. It was amazing to see these masterpieces up close, to stand in front of the paintings I had only seen in textbooks. I spent hours in the museum, wandering through the galleries and taking in the creativity that seemed to fill every space. By the time I left MoMA, it was late afternoon and the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the city was starting to come alive in a new way. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had explored so many parts of New York that day, and it was only the beginning. There was so much more to see, so much more to experience. That night, as I sat in my apartment, reflecting on my day, I realized that New York wasn't just a city. It was a place where dreams were made. It was a place full of opportunities, full of possibilities. And I was lucky to be here, to have the chance to experience it all. The city had opened itself to me, and I was ready to explore more. There was still so much to discover, and I couldn't wait for tomorrow. Chapter 5. Meeting a New Friend. It had been a few weeks since I arrived in New York, and while I had started to find my way around and get used to the rhythm of the city, there was still something missing. I had explored the streets, visited, the landmarks and immersed myself in the hustle and bustle of the city, but I hadn't really made a connection with anyone. I was still that outsider, someone who didn't quite fit in yet. I missed the feeling of being around people who understood me, people I could talk to easily, laugh with, and share my experiences. The friendships I had back home seemed so far away, and the new ones I was trying to form in New York felt difficult. My English was improving, but I still struggled to express myself the way I wanted to, and it often felt like there was a barrier between me and the people around me. That all changed one rainy afternoon when I decided to go to a local coffee shop near my apartment. I had heard that it was a great spot to meet people, and I thought it might be a good place to relax and read for a while. The rain had started coming down heavily, and the streets were wet with people rushing to find shelter from the storm. I opened the door of the coffee shop and was immediately greeted by the warmth and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The place was cozy, with soft lighting, rustic wooden tables, and the gentle hum of conversation in the background. I stood, in line to order my coffee, scanning the menu for something new to try. I was still getting used to the different names of drinks. Some were familiar, like lattes and cappuccinos, but others were new to me. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to go with a caramel macchiato, something I had never tried before. I reached the counter and smiled at the barista, a friendly woman with a warm smile and short black hair. "Hi, how's it going?" she asked with a bright voice, her accent unmistakably New York. I smiled nervously, still not quite used to the speed of the conversations. "Hi, I'm good, thank you. I'll have a caramel macchiato, please." "Great choice. Coming right up," she said, before turning to prepare my order. As I waited for my coffee, I noticed a girl sitting at a nearby table. She had a book open in front of her, but her eyes were focused on her phone, scrolling through something. I couldn't help but notice how alone she looked. She wasn't talking to anyone, and although she was surrounded by people, there was a sense of quiet around her. For some reason, I felt drawn to her. Maybe it was because I understood that feeling of being alone in a new city, or maybe it was because I could see the same uncertainty in her eyes that I had felt in myself when I first arrived in New York. I decided to take a chance. I grabbed my coffee and walked over to her table. "Hi, is this seat taken?" I asked with a smile, trying to sound casual, though my heart was racing a little. She looked up, surprised at first, but then her expression softened. "No, go ahead," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. I sat down across from her, my heart still beating faster than I expected. I wasn't sure why I had decided to approach her, but it felt right in that moment. She looked at me curiously as I took a sip of my coffee. "Thanks for letting me sit here. It's so crowded today," I said, trying to break the ice. She smiled and nodded. No problem. Yeah, it's crazy out there, she said, glancing out the window at the rain. I'm Maria, by the way. Nice to meet you. Selena, I replied, feeling more at ease now. Nice to meet you too. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our drinks. I wasn't sure what to say next, but then Maria spoke again. So, what brings you to New York? She asked, looking at me with interest. I hesitated for a second before answering. I moved here to study and improve my English, I said. I've always wanted to come here, and I thought it would be a great place to learn and experience something new. Maria's eyes brightened when she heard that. I totally get that. I moved here for the same reason, she said, laughing a little. I'm from Mexico, and I've been here for about 6 months now. I've been learning English too. It's hard sometimes, but it's so worth it. I felt an immediate connection. We both understood the struggles of living in a foreign country, trying to adapt, and working through the language barrier. We both had dreams and hopes, but we were also facing the challenges that came with being in a new place, far from home. That's so cool, I said, smiling. It's nice to meet someone who understands what it's like to be here and trying to figure it all out. Maria nodded. Yeah, it's tough sometimes, especially when you're trying to speak the language, but it's also amazing. I've met so many people, and I feel like I'm learning so much every day. We spent the next hour talking about our experiences, our backgrounds, and the challenges we faced. Maria shared stories about her life in Mexico and how different everything was in New York. She told me about the food, the people, and the adventures she had had since arriving. I shared my own journey, how I had dreamed of coming to New York for years, and how the city had both amazed and overwhelmed me. It felt so natural to talk to her. We laughed about the small things, like how difficult it was to understand the New York accent at first, or how we had both gotten lost in the subway on our first day. For the first time since arriving in the city, I felt like I had found someone I could truly talk to. By the time we finished our drinks, we had exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet up again the following week. It felt like the beginning of a real friendship. Hey, let's keep in touch, Maria said as we stood up to leave. I'd love to show you some more spots around the city. I think you'll like them. I'd love that, I replied, smiling. I'm glad we met. As I walked back to my apartment, I felt a warmth inside that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had made a new friend, someone who understood me, someone who shared the same struggles and dreams. It was amazing how just one conversation could change everything. New York suddenly didn't feel so big and lonely anymore. I knew that. With people like Maria around, this city was starting to feel more like home. Chapter 6. Participating in community activities. After meeting Maria, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Having someone who shared similar challenges made New York feel a little more like home. We would meet up regularly, exploring different parts of the city and practicing our English together. But as much as I enjoyed our conversations and outings, I realized I wanted to do more than just explore the city. I wanted to give back. I wanted to be part of something larger, something that would connect me even more to the community around me. It was during one of our coffee breaks that Maria mentioned a volunteer opportunity she had been involved with. "There's this program that helps immigrant children learn English," she explained. "They need volunteers to help with tutoring and to practice speaking with the kids. It's a really rewarding experience." The moment she mentioned it, something clicked inside me. I had always wanted to volunteer, to give back in some way, but I hadn't known how to get involved. I had been so focused on my own adjustment to the city and my own challenges that I hadn't even considered how I could contribute to the community. This sounded like the perfect opportunity. An opportunity to improve my English while also helping others who were in a similar situation to mine. Maria gave me the details of the program, and the next day, I contacted the coordinator to sign up as a volunteer. The coordinator, a kind woman named Rachel, welcomed me enthusiastically and explained what the program was all about. "We focus on helping children from immigrant families who are learning English as a second language. They come from all over the world just like us," she said. "Your role would be to help them with their English homework, practice conversation, and just provide a supportive environment where they can feel comfortable speaking." I was excited and nervous all at once. The idea of working with kids was both exhilarating and intimidating, especially since I still didn't feel completely confident in my own English skills. What if I made a mistake or couldn't explain something properly? But Rachel reassured me, saying that the children were just as eager to learn as I was to help them. "The kids are very understanding, and trust me, you'll learn just as much from them as they'll learn from you." That Saturday, I arrived at the community center where the program was held. It was a bright, welcoming space with colorful walls and art projects scattered around the room. As soon as I walked in, I was greeted by Rachel, who introduced me to a group of children sitting around a large table. They were between the ages of 8 and 12, and they came from different backgrounds. Some spoke Spanish, some spoke Mandarin, others spoke Arabic. Each of them had a unique story, and I could see the eagerness in their eyes as they looked at me, curious to know who I was and what I was there to do. I was assigned to work with a boy named Ahmed, who was about 9 years old and had just moved to New York from Syria. He spoke very little English, but his enthusiasm was contagious. He smiled shyly when I sat next to him, and we began by introducing ourselves. "My name is Selena," I said slowly, trying to make sure he could understand me. "What's your name?" He hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking between me and his notebook. "Ahmed," he said quietly. "Nice to meet you, Ahmed," I said with a smile, trying to make him feel comfortable. "Do you like reading?" Ahmed nodded, and we started working on some basic English reading exercises. The task seemed simple enough. He had to match pictures with words like dog, cat, and apple. But as we went through the exercises, I realized just how difficult it could be for him. The words were so foreign to him, and some of the pictures didn't seem to make sense. I could see his frustration building as he struggled to understand. I paused for a moment, trying to think of a way to make it easier for him. I could relate to how he felt. Learning a new language was hard, especially when the words didn't connect to anything familiar. I pointed to the picture of the dog and said, "This is a dog. Can you say dog?" He looked at the picture, then at me, and finally, he repeated the word. "Dog." "Great job," I said, my heart swelling with pride for him. We continued on, and slowly but surely, Ahmed began to grasp the words. With each correct answer, his confidence grew. By the end of the session, he was beaming with pride as he read the words on his own. It was an incredibly fulfilling experience to see him grow, even in such a short amount of time. During the break, I talked with Rachel and some of the other volunteers. They were all so passionate about the program, and I could tell they genuinely cared about the children. One volunteer, a woman named Laura, told me about how she had been volunteering for years and how rewarding it was to see the kids' progress. "It's amazing to watch them gain confidence in their English," she said. "You can tell when they start to believe in themselves." As the session ended, I said goodbye to Ahmed and the other children, feeling an overwhelming sense of joy. I had come to the community center with the intention of helping others, but I realized I had gained so much more than I had given. The children were so open and kind, and they made me feel like I belonged. They reminded me of how powerful it is to make a connection with someone, even when there's a language barrier. Over the next few weeks, I continued to volunteer at the community center every Saturday. I worked with different children, each with their own unique challenges and strengths. Some of them were struggling to read, while others needed help with speaking. But what I loved most was the way they encouraged each other. There was always a sense of camaraderie in the room, as the kids cheered each other on and celebrated their small victories together. Through my volunteer work, I realized that learning English wasn't just about mastering vocabulary and grammar. It was about making connections. It was about finding common ground, even when words didn't come easily. The children taught me just as much as I taught them. They taught me patience, empathy, and the importance of believing in myself and others. They reminded me that learning a new language or adapting to a new environment wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. And, slowly but surely, I started to see that in myself too. With each tutoring session, my confidence in my own English skills grew. I stopped being afraid of making mistakes, and instead, I embraced them as part of the learning process. I was no longer just a stranger in New York. I was part of the community, and it felt amazing. Chapter 7. Facing Personal Challenges. It was a chilly evening in New York when I received the phone call. I had been working late on a school assignment, my mind consumed by the new concepts I was learning and the progress I was making with my English. I had almost forgotten about the time difference between New York and my hometown, but as soon as I saw the number flash across the screen, I knew. It was my mother calling. I quickly answered, my heart pounding. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" I tried to sound casual, but there was a tension in my voice. I could tell she had something important to tell me. Her voice trembled slightly on the other end of the line. "Selena, I need to talk to you about something. It's about your father." My stomach dropped, and suddenly all the noise of the city seemed to fade away. The busy streets, the honking cars, the distant chatter, it all became background noise as I focused entirely on my mother's voice. She went on, her words barely audible as they filled me with dread. "Your father. He's been sick for a while now. It's more serious than we thought. He's been diagnosed with a condition, and we don't know how much time we have left." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't process what she was saying. My father, the strong, steady figure who had always been there for me, was sick. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. He had never let on that anything was wrong. He had always been the one to tell me to be strong, to follow my dreams. How could this be happening? And how could it be so sudden? Tears started to well up in my eyes, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, a mix of confusion and frustration bubbling up. "I should have known. Why didn't you let me come home?" She sighed softly, the sound of worry heavy in her voice. "We didn't want to worry you, Selena. You're so far away, and we didn't want to distract you from your studies. But now, I think it's time for you to know. You're our daughter, and you deserve to know the truth." I sat down on the edge of my bed, the weight of the news sinking in. I felt helpless. What could I do from thousands of miles away? I was so far removed from my family, from everything that was familiar. The distance between New York and home suddenly felt like an insurmountable ocean. I wanted to be there, to comfort my mother, to be with my father, But instead, I was here, alone in a foreign city, with no way to fix what was broken. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions, attending classes, meeting with Maria, even volunteering at the community center. But my mind was elsewhere. I found it harder to focus on anything. Every time I sat down to study, my thoughts would drift back to my father, to the uncertainty of the situation. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how much I wished I could be there, sitting by his side, telling him everything would be okay. At times, I even questioned my decision to come to New York in the first place. Was it selfish of me to leave? Had I chosen my own dreams over the people who had always been there for me? The guilt gnawed at me. It felt like my heart was torn between two worlds, two lives, one here in New York and the other back home with my family. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I decided to call my mother again. I needed to hear her voice, to feel some sort of connection to the life I had left behind. When she answered, her voice was softer than usual, and I could tell that she, too, was trying to hold it together. "Mom?" I said quietly. "I'm sorry for not being there. I feel so far away and I don't know what to do. What if I should come home? What if I'm missing my chance to say goodbye?" My mother was silent for a moment before she spoke. "Selena," she said gently, her voice filled with wisdom, "you're exactly where you need to be right now. Your father would want you to be strong and to continue following your dreams. He's proud of you for coming to New York. He's always been proud of you, and I know that he wants you to live your life, to keep moving forward." Her words gave me a small measure of comfort, but the pain of not being there with him, not being able to hold his hand and tell him I loved him, still lingered. I wanted so badly to be there, to fix everything, but I couldn't. And for the first time since I arrived in New York, I felt truly alone. The next few weeks were some of the hardest I had ever faced. My father's condition continued to worsen, and though my family kept me updated, I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. I threw myself into my studies, into volunteering, and into the friendships I was building. But the weight of everything was always there, a constant shadow hanging over me. One afternoon, I went for a walk through Central Park, needing to clear my mind. The park had become a place of solace for me since I had arrived in New York. It was the one place where I could feel at peace, even if just for a little while. I sat on a bench, watching the people around me, the children playing, the couples walking hand in hand. It was hard to focus on anything, but I tried. I thought about the lessons I had learned since coming here. I had come to New York to grow, to push myself outside of my comfort zone, and to learn more about who I was and what I was capable of. But now, I had to face something that I couldn't control, something that was bigger than any challenge I had faced before. It felt unfair, like I was being tested in ways I wasn't ready for. As I sat there, I realized that sometimes life throws challenges at us that we can't prepare for, no matter how much we plan. And in those moments, we have to find strength in the things we can control, the people we love, the goals we pursue, and the way we continue to move forward, even when things are hard. It wasn't easy, and I wasn't sure how to balance everything: my grief, my studies, my new life in New York. But I knew that I had to keep going. I had to stay strong, for myself and for my family. I couldn't change the circumstances, but I could control how I faced them. And so, in the face of uncertainty and heartache, I decided that I would keep moving forward. I would continue to grow, to learn, and to honor the dreams my father had always supported. I wasn't alone, after all. I had my family's love, my friends, and the new community I was becoming a part of here in New York. And that was something I could hold on to. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but I also knew I had the strength to face whatever came next. And in that moment, I found a small sense of peace amidst the storm. Chapter 8. Academic Progress. The days seemed to blend together as the weeks went by, and yet, with each passing day, I began to feel a shift. My life in New York had been a whirlwind of emotions, challenges, and adjustments. But now, as I settled more into my routine, I realized that I was also beginning to make significant progress in areas I had once struggled with, specifically my academics and my English language skills. It wasn't easy. Every day I woke up to the same uncertainty, to the same fear that I wouldn't be able to keep up with my studies, or that my English still wasn't good enough. I had learned to push through the fear, but there were days when I doubted myself, when the weight of everything felt a little too heavy. I would sit in class, my heart racing, worried that I would be the one to fall behind, worried that I would never be able to fully grasp the material or express myself clearly. But something began to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started to feel more confident. I was no longer the quiet student sitting at the back of the class, afraid to speak or ask questions. I was engaging more, contributing in discussions and answering questions. It wasn't just my English that was improving. It was my understanding of the material, my ability to connect ideas, and my willingness to take risks. The turning point came during a particularly challenging week. We were working on a complex project that required us to analyze a series of case studies, write a report, and present our findings to the class. It was a task that seemed insurmountable at first, especially given my limited vocabulary and still developing speaking skills. The idea of standing in front of the class and speaking in English about a complex subject was terrifying to me. I had always been a shy person, and public speaking in any language felt like a daunting task. But as I sat down to work on the project, something unexpected happened. I started to break down the task into manageable pieces. Instead of worrying about the final product, I focused on one step at a time, reading the case studies, taking notes, researching additional material, and writing. With each task, I felt a little more confident. The language barrier that had once seemed like an insurmountable wall began to feel less intimidating. I reached out to Maria for help. She had been through the same struggles, and I knew she would understand the pressure I was feeling. "Maria, I'm really struggling with the language part of this project," I admitted one afternoon, as we sat together in the library, books spread out in front of us. "I know the content, but I'm worried about explaining it in English. I'm not sure I can do it." Maria smiled at me warmly, always the optimist. "Selena, you've come so far already. You know this material, and you've been practicing your English every day. You're ready for this. Just take it one step at a time. And remember, it's okay to make mistakes. You're learning, and that's what matters." Her words gave me a sense of relief. She was right. I had come a long way. This wasn't about being perfect. It was about trying, making mistakes, and improving. It was about taking the opportunity to grow, no matter how uncomfortable or uncertain it felt. The next few days, I threw myself into the project. I worked on my report late into the night, constantly revising and refining my ideas. I made a list of the key points I wanted to cover in my presentation and practiced saying them aloud in front of a mirror, focusing on my pronunciation and clarity. It was awkward at first, and I stumbled over a few words, but as I kept going, my confidence grew. I even recorded myself speaking, listening to the playback and making corrections. It felt strange, but I knew it was helping. The day of the presentation arrived, and my nerves were through the roof. I arrived at class early to set up my materials, my hands shaking slightly as I arranged the papers on the desk. My mind raced with doubts. What if I forget everything? What if my English isn't clear enough? What if they don't understand me? But as I stood in front of the class and began speaking, something amazing happened. I realized that I did know the material. I had worked hard to understand it, and now I could communicate it clearly. The words came more easily than I expected, and even though I stumbled a few times, I quickly recovered. My classmates listened attentively, and my teacher nodded in approval as I spoke. When I finished, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had done it. Afterward, my teacher praised me for my effort. That was an excellent presentation, Selena, she said with a smile. Your analysis was thoughtful, and your English has improved significantly. I'm proud of the progress you've made. The compliment made my heart swell with pride. I had pushed through my fears, and I had succeeded. The project wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The fact that I had done it, that I had taken a risk and stepped outside of my comfort zone, meant more to me than any grade or praise. From that moment on, I began to feel more comfortable with my academic progress. I was still working on my English, still learning new vocabulary and refining my grammar, but I had made real strides. I no longer feared speaking in class or making mistakes. I understood that mistakes were just part of the learning process, and they didn't define me. What mattered was that I kept moving forward, that I kept trying, and that I kept growing. The confidence I gained from that project carried over into other areas of my studies. I found myself contributing more in group discussions, asking more questions, and volunteering for presentations. My English still wasn't perfect, but I had stopped focusing on perfection. I focused on progress, on learning from every experience, and on pushing myself to be better. As the semester went on, my academic performance improved, and I began to feel more like I belonged in the classroom. My professors noticed the difference too. They started to encourage me more, offering praise for my dedication and hard work. It felt incredible to hear their positive feedback, and it fueled my desire to continue improving. But it wasn't just about the grades or the assignments. It was about the growth I had experienced. I had come to New York with the intention of learning, but I had learned more than just the material. I had learned about resilience, about pushing through doubt, and about believing in myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest achievement of all. As I sat in the library one afternoon, reflecting on how far I had come, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. New York had challenged me in ways I had never expected, but it had also given me the opportunity to rise to those challenges. I wasn't the same person who had arrived a few months ago. I was stronger, more confident, and more capable than I had ever been. I knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but I also knew that I was ready for them. I had made incredible progress, and that progress was only the beginning. Chapter 9. Career Opportunity. It had been a few months since I arrived in New York, and though I had faced numerous challenges along the way, language barriers, homesickness, and academic struggles, I had also made progress. My English was improving every day. I had developed a routine, and I was finally starting to feel a sense of belonging in this massive, fast-paced city. But despite all my growth, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There was always this underlying question in the back of my mind. What's next? I had come to New York with a goal: to improve my English and gain new experiences. But there was another part of me, one that I had pushed aside for a while, that wanted more. I had dreams of building a career, of making something of myself in this city. The idea of finding a job that would allow me to combine my passions and skills had always seemed so distant. But now, as I walked the streets of New York, I began to feel the spark of possibility. It was during a routine visit to the library, where I often went to study, that I saw an advertisement pinned to the bulletin board. Internship opportunity, marketing and communications assistant at a leading international firm. It was a job posting that immediately caught my eye, and my heart skipped a beat. The position was everything I had hoped for: an opportunity to apply my skills, work in a professional environment, and build my career. The company was well known, the role was relevant to my field of study, and the best part? They were looking for someone who was fluent in multiple languages, exactly what I had been working so hard to achieve. For a moment, I stood frozen in front of the bulletin board, reading the details over and over again, my mind racing. Could I really do this? I thought. Am I ready for this opportunity? I had always dreamed of working in marketing and communications, but the thought of applying for such a competitive position filled me with both excitement and fear. What if my English wasn't good enough? What if I didn't have the experience they were looking for? What if they didn't even take me seriously because I was still learning? But then, a voice inside me pushed back. I had come this far. I had faced so many obstacles and had pushed through every single one of them. I had earned the right to apply. I wasn't going to let self-doubt hold me back. I decided to apply. The next day, I spent hours perfecting my resume, carefully tailoring it to match the job description. I made sure to highlight my academic achievements, my volunteer work, and the skills I had gained in New York, skills that were both relevant and valuable. I wrote a cover letter that was sincere and authentic, explaining my journey to New York and why I was passionate about the role. After hitting send on my application, I sat back and took a deep breath. The waiting game had begun. For the next few days, I tried to push the thought of the job out of my mind. I focused on my studies, met with Maria for our weekly coffee breaks, and continued to volunteer at the community center. But every time I checked my email, my heart would race, wondering if I had received a response. It was a week later when I finally saw the email pop up in my inbox. My hands shook as I clicked open the message. It was from the company. Dear Selena, the email began. Thank you for your application. We were impressed by your qualifications and would like to invite you to an interview for the Marketing and Communications Assistant position. I read the email twice, just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I had made it to the interview stage. I felt a wave of excitement and nervousness wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and I immediately began preparing. I researched the company extensively, read up on their values and mission, and practiced answering common interview questions. I also rehearsed how I would speak about my background and how I had developed my skills. Though I had come a long way since arriving in New York, I was still nervous about speaking English in such a formal setting. What if I stumbled over my words? What if they couldn't understand me? The night before the interview, I found myself pacing around my apartment, feeling a mix of anticipation and fear. I can do this, I reminded myself. I've come this far. I'm ready. The next morning, I dressed in my best professional outfit, feeling both empowered and a little unsure of myself. As I took the subway to the company's office, I reminded myself that this was my opportunity, my chance to show the world what I had to offer. When I arrived at the office, I was greeted by a receptionist who led me to a waiting area. The office was sleek and modern, with glass walls and open spaces that exuded professionalism. I could feel the energy in the air. This was a place where people worked hard and achieved big things. After a few minutes, I was called into the interview room. The interviewer, a woman named Emily, welcomed me with a smile. She was warm and professional, which helped ease some of the tension I was feeling. She started by asking me about my background and what had brought me to New York. As I spoke about my journey, I could feel the nervousness fading. This was my story, my experience, and I was proud of it. I spoke about my studies, my passion for marketing, and how I had worked hard to improve my English. As the interview progressed, I began to feel more confident. Emily asked me about specific situations where I had demonstrated key skills, such as communication and teamwork. I spoke about my volunteer work, how I had helped children learn English, and how I had worked with people from different backgrounds. I could tell that she was impressed with my answers, and I felt a growing sense of pride in myself. At the end of the interview, Emily asked if I had any questions. This was a moment I had prepared for. I asked thoughtful questions about the company's future goals and how they supported employee growth and development. I wanted to show that I was not just looking for a job. I was looking for a place where I could contribute and grow. As I left the interview room, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. I had given it my all. I had shown them who I was and what I could offer. The hardest part was over. Now, all I could do was wait and hope for the best. The following week, I received another email. This time, my heart raced as I clicked open the message. "Dear Selena," the email began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for the Marketing and Communications Assistant position at our company. I read those words over and over again, my mind racing. I had done it. I had gotten the job. In that moment, I felt a wave of emotions, relief, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of pride. This was the moment I had worked so hard for. It was a career opportunity, a chance to build my future in New York, and it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. As I sat down to respond to the email, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. A few months ago, I had arrived in New York full of uncertainty, unsure of whether I would ever feel at home or whether I would be able to achieve my dreams. But now I was living proof that anything was possible if I worked hard, believed in myself, and kept pushing forward. This was just the beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where this new opportunity would take me. Chapter 10: Confidence and the Future. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to realize that the person I was today was not the same person who had arrived in New York all those months ago. The quiet, uncertain girl who had stepped off the plane, full of fear and doubt, had transformed into someone stronger, more confident, and more capable. It had been a journey of self-discovery, a journey of overcoming obstacles and pushing past limits I had once thought were insurmountable. And though the challenges were far from over, I knew one thing for certain. I had changed, and the future was no longer something I feared. It was something I looked forward to with hope and excitement. My internship at the marketing firm had been a huge turning point. Not only had I gained valuable experience in the industry, but I had also gained a newfound confidence in my abilities. The role required me to use my English daily, writing emails, creating content for social media, and presenting ideas in meetings. And with each passing day, my language skills improved. I was no longer afraid to speak up in meetings or share my thoughts with my colleagues. I had found my voice, and I knew that I had a place in this fast-paced world of business. But the journey didn't stop there. With each new task, I felt a sense of growth, both professionally and personally. My manager, Emily, continued to offer guidance, pushing me to take on new challenges. "You're doing great, Selena," she said one afternoon after I presented a new marketing campaign idea to the team. "You're thinking outside the box, and that's exactly what we need. Keep it up." Her words of encouragement gave me the reassurance I needed. I had come to New York to find myself, to pursue my dreams, and I was doing it. Slowly but surely, I was building a career, a life, and a future that I could be proud of. But it wasn't just about work. It was about the other aspects of my life, the relationships I had built, the friends I had made, and the connections I had forged with people who shared my experiences and challenges. Maria and I had become close friends over the months, supporting each other through the ups and downs of life in New York. We would meet regularly for coffee, share stories about our experiences, and laugh about the funny things that happened as we navigated this new world together. It felt like a real friendship, one that had grown out of mutual respect, shared struggles, and a deep understanding of what it meant to start over in a foreign place. There were also the students at the community center. I had continued to volunteer every weekend, and I had watched with pride as the children's English improved. I had formed bonds with them too, each one teaching me something new about resilience and perseverance. They would often come to me with questions, and I would do my best to help them understand the language, but I knew that I was learning just as much from them as they were from me. They taught me patience, empathy, and the importance of creating a safe space where people felt comfortable making mistakes and growing from them. One Saturday afternoon, as I sat with Ahmed, the young boy I had worked with early on, he looked up at me with a bright smile. "Thank you, Selena," he said, his English growing stronger with each passing week. "You've helped me so much. I can talk more now." I smiled, feeling a lump form in my throat. This was why I volunteered. It wasn't about the hours or the tasks. It was about making a real difference in someone's life, about being part of their journey as they learned and grew. And in the process, I had grown too. The more I reflected on the past months, the more I realized how much I had changed. I had learned to embrace challenges rather than shy away from them. I had learned that setbacks didn't define me. They were opportunities for growth. I had learned to be patient with myself and trust that, with time and effort, I would get where I wanted to go. There were still days when I felt uncertain, when self-doubt crept in, but those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. The confidence I had gained from my academic progress, my career development, and my relationships had begun to shape a new version of myself, one that was willing to take risks, to speak up, and to take ownership of my future. And the future, as I looked ahead, was full of possibilities. I thought back to when I had first arrived in New York, when everything seemed so overwhelming. I had no idea where I was going or what my life would look like. I had only known that I wanted to grow, that I wanted to learn, and that I wanted to create a future for myself that was different from the one I had left behind. I had worked hard to get to this point, and I knew that I wasn't done yet. There was still so much I wanted to achieve. I wanted to continue advancing in my career, perhaps even start my own business one day. I wanted to travel, to see the world, and experience more cultures and languages. I wanted to help others the way I had helped the children at the community center. I wanted to give back, to make a positive impact on the world around me. And above all, I wanted to continue learning, to keep growing, and to never stop chasing the person I was becoming. As I sat on the rooftop of my apartment one evening, watching the sun set over the skyline of New York, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had come so far, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, I was ready. The future was mine to shape, and I knew that I had the strength, the skills, and the determination to make it what I wanted. The city stretched out before me, full of opportunities and challenges, and I felt ready to meet them all. I had found my confidence, and I knew that no matter what came next, I could handle it. I wasn't just living in New York anymore. I was part of it. And with each new step, I was creating a future that was all my own. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.